It's just 4 days until the start of Euro 2024, don't they look happy about it? And debates as to who's going to win it are beginning to rumble. Euro 2020 finalists England are the favourites with most of the bookies, despite never having won the Euros before and having a ragtag back four parcelled together at the last minute, followed narrowly by 2022 World Cup finalist France, who went out in the round of 16 against Switzerland last time around, the host nation Germany, who have had a mini resurgence inspiring some optimism following 5 years of abysmal form by their standards, Portugal, who were bitterly disappointing at both the last Euros and the last World Cup, Spain, who were knocked out, like Portugal, by dark horses Morocco at the World Cup, and the holders Italy, who didn't even qualify for the last World Cup, or the one before that. The Netherlands, Belgium and Croatia make up the rest of the chasing pack, before you get into Greece Euro 2004 territory with the likes of Denmark, Switzerland and Austria. But what attention should we give the odds anyway? I mean, how often do the pre-tournament favourites, or even just one of the favourites, actually win the Euros? Well, today that's what we're going to find out. Following on from a similar video that I made before the last World Cup, which I enjoyed making and lots of you seem to enjoy watching, I have dug deep down into the archives, which gets especially difficult the further you go back, before the days of online bookmakers, to take a look at the outright favourites at every Euros, how they actually performed, and how the eventual champions' chances were rated before a ball had been kicked. The first Euros, and also by far the strangest Euros, back when it was known as the European Nations Cup, was held in 1960. So that is where we will begin. And by the end, you can be absolutely certain of one thing, and that is that we will have figured out, without any shadow of a doubt, who's going to win Euro 2024. Please gamble responsibly, or even better, don't gamble at all. You're only helping Bet365 waste yet more money signing players who are doomed to fail at Stoke City because the club is cursed. Or do, it probably won't end well, but it's up to you. Don't listen to me, but I am referencing odds in this video solely for recreational purposes to establish who the favourites were heading into every Euros, and not, I repeat, not for promotional purposes. I've never accepted any advertising on this or any other channel at great personal cost to me, the most lucrative offers of which always come from gambling and crypto companies, so I just want to make sure that I'm absolutely rock solid about that. Skint, but rock solid. Right, without further ado, who might be everyone's favourite footballer on this channel, but isn't a European nation and therefore has never been the favourite to win the Euros, here's how the favourites performed at every single European Championship. 1960, the Soviet Union. Winners. Euro 1960, or UEFA 60 as it was referred to at the time, was a strange old tournament. Old, because it was over 60 years ago, and strange, because it was the first ever Euros, and almost half of all UEFA members refused to even compete in it. UEFA was only founded in 1954, with 31 members, so the idea of an international UEFA competition was still a fairly novel and controversial one. Heck, the British home championship teams, England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, had only agreed to compete in the World Cup for the first time in 1950, 20 years after it was founded. England, Italy, West Germany and the Netherlands, four powerhouses of the European game, had all voted against the establishment of a European Nations Cup in 1957, and were therefore among the 14 teams who chose not to compete in the first Euros. The format was also a little bit strange. Qualification was a knockout tournament in of itself, with the entrants playing home and away matches in the round of 16 and quarterfinals, which started all the way back in September 1958, with the four semi-finalists qualifying for the four-day finals, which were hosted in France. Spain, famously, or infamously, under fascist dictator Francisco Franco, refused to travel to the communist Soviet Union for their quarter-final, after the USSR declined UEFA's invitation to play the game in a neutral venue. Spain were disqualified. That was significant because Real Madrid had just won 5 consecutive European Cups, the first 5, and boasting the likes of Paco Gento, Luis Suarez, and naturalised citizens like Ladislau Kubala and Alfredo Di Stefano, Spain were a strong side and would have been one of the favourites. As it happened, 3 of the 4 finalists were communist countries, with the hosts France being the sole exceptions. France were the second favourites heading into the tournament, having finished third at the 1958 World Cup, but the Soviet Union were the clear and deserved favourites. Following a 5-0 defeat against England in 1958, the USSR had won literally every game they'd played, and their team starred the likes of Lev Yashin, who went on to win the Ballon d'Or, captain and midfield dynamo Igor Neto, and the prolific strike partnership of Ivanov and Ponedelnik. Hosts and second favourites France lost 5-4 against Yugoslavia in the semi-finals and 2-0 against Czechoslovakia in the third-place playoff, but the USSR thrashed Czechoslovakia before beating Yugoslavia after extra time in the final. I'm not saying that it was easier to get Euros tickets back in those days, but the final was watched by fewer than 20,000 people, and fewer than 10,000 turned up for France's third-place playoff on home soil, both of which were played in 40,000 capacity stadiums. 1964. The Soviet Union. Finalists. Finding out who were the pre-tournament favourites at Euro 64 was the toughest task in this entire video, but most sources that I found tended to tip the USSR to retain their crown, albeit only very narrowly ahead of Hungary and Spain. There was still no West Germany, but the number of participating teams increased from 17 to 29. England were the major flops in qualifying, losing against France. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union emphasised their class by overcoming a highly rated Italian team, qualifying for the 4-day finals, hosted by Spain this time, alongside Spain, Hungary and Denmark. The Soviets battered Denmark 3-0 in the semis. Meanwhile, Spain required extra time to overcome Hungary, but in the final, it was Spain, in what was to be their only major tournament success, all the way until their tiki-taka generation of 2008-12, who emerged victorious. Inter Milan's Luis Suarez was Spain's star man, and he only narrowly missed out on that season's Ballon d'Or to Manchester United's Denis Law. 1968. England. Semi-finals. After winning the World Cup on home soil in 1966, England headed to Euro 68 as favourites, and for good reason. If anything, England's squad had only improved since the World Cup, with the likes of Geoff Hurst, Bobby Moore, and Martin Peters all hitting their prime. England also defeated the reigning champion Spain 3-1 in the quarter-final, qualifying for what ended up being a 5-day tournament this time around, due to a final replay, hosted by Italy, alongside the Italians, Yugoslavia, and our old friends the Soviet Union. There was only 1 goal scored across both semi-finals, and that came courtesy of Yugoslavia's star man Dragan Djaric, knocking England out in the 86th minute. The other semi-final, between Italy and the Soviet Union, ended 0-0 after extra time and was decided by a coin toss, which Italy won. And they say that penalties are a cruel way to get knocked out of a tournament. Italy drew 1-1 with Yugoslavia in the final, but in the replay, just 2 days later, they won 2-0 in front of a crowd that was less than half the size of the one that turned up for the first final. 1972. West Germany. Winners. Well, West Germany finally entered the Euros in 1968, which was the first to have a group stage qualifying format, but they finished below Yugoslavia in their qualifying group and were knocked out. By 1972, however, they were all in. Back to a 4-day finals, starting at the semi-final stage. It is worth noting that the Euros qualifiers in these days were absolutely brutal. First, you had to top a 4-team group, which dispensed of the likes of France, Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands, and then came a 2-legged qualifying quarter-final, which ended Italy, Romania, England, and Yugoslavia's Euro aspirations. England and Italy would have been among the favourites, had they qualified, but West Germany were the best team in Europe at the time, and they beat England 3-1 over 2 legs. This was a West German team of Meyer, Beckenbauer, Breitner, Netzer, Heinkes and Müller. They beat the host Belgium in the semis and dispatched of the Soviet Union, who were competing in their third final in only 4 Euros, 3-0 in the final. It was West Germany's first Euros crown, and just 2 years later, they won the World Cup. 1976. West Germany. Finalists. In light of winning Euro 72, followed by the 1974 World Cup on home soil, West Germany were unsurprisingly the favourites to win Euro 76, but it was actually much tighter than last time around. That's because the Netherlands, who had reached the 1974 World Cup final, playing by far the best football at that tournament, outplayed Germany for much of the final and went 1-0 up before ultimately losing 2-1, were pretty much neck and neck with them. Sadly, this was to be Johan Cruyff's last international tournament, aged only 29, but under George Noble, rather than Rinus Michels, the Dutch underwhelmed. They lost 3-1 in the semi-final after extra time against Czechoslovakia, their only goal coming via an Anton Ondrejson goal. Incidentally, the Czechoslovakia captain actually scored the game's only 2 goals in normal time, both in the same goal, in separate halves, but one for either side. West Germany also required extra time and a Dieter Müller hat-trick in order to overcome Yugoslavia in the semis, and in the final, they drew 2-2 with Czechoslovakia in normal time and lost 5-3 on penalties. The Czechs, who weren't particularly fancied coming into the tournament, scored all 5 of their penalties, the last of which, by Antonin Panenka, was so brave and iconic that the technique would subsequently be named after him. 1980. West Germany. Winners. Yes, a Euro 80, which was the first Euros to incorporate a group stage, increasing the number of teams at the finals to 8 and the length of the tournament to 11 days, West Germany were the favourites for the 3rd straight tournament, bearing in mind that they didn't even appear in any of the first 3. There were no quarter or semi-finals at Euro 80, just 2 groups, with the winners of each qualifying for the final and the runners-up a 3rd place playoff. England and Italy, who were the next 2 favourites behind the West Germans, were drawn in the same group, but neither of them made the final, finishing 2nd and 3rd behind Belgium. West Germany, meanwhile, beat their old foes the Netherlands yet again en route to the final, where they found Belgium to be a tougher nut to crack than most onlookers had anticipated. A Horst Hrubesch double was enough to secure them a 2-1 win, his second goal coming just 2 minutes from time. 1984. France. Winners. France's fortunes transformed radically between failing to qualify for Euro 80 and being the favourites at Euro 84. France reached the semi-finals of the 1982 World Cup, where they were unfortunate to lose on penalties against West Germany following a stunning 3-3 draw, and probably would have won that game had German goalkeeper Harald Schumacher not got away with trying to kill Patrick Battiston. In Battiston, Amoros, Tigana and Giresse, France had lots of talented players, but one man stood out head and shoulders above all the rest. Michel Platini was probably the best player on the planet in 1984, and thanks largely to him, France lived up to their tag as favourites. Platini scored 9 goals in only 5 games from midfield at the tournament, scoring in every single one of France's games, including the winning goal against Portugal in the semis, the opener against Spain in the final, and hat-tricks against both Belgium and Yugoslavia. It is arguably the greatest international tournament that a footballer has ever had, right up there with Maradona in 86 and Maguire in 18. 1988. West Germany. Semi-finals. West Germany put up a poor showing, by their standards, at Euro 84, going out in the group stage and only winning 1 game against Romania, but by Euro 88, the pundits, and punters, had them back on top. Finalists at the 1986 World Cup, where they lost 3-2 against a Maradona-inspired Argentina, West Germany were now managed by Franz Beckenbauer, and their squad boasted the likes of Lothar Matthäus, Jürgen Klinsmann, and Rudi Völler. England and Italy were the next 2 favourites, only narrowly behind them, followed by the USSR. But West Germany's status as hosts gave them the advantage. The Netherlands, meanwhile, who actually won Euro 88, were relatively unfancied. That seems wild now when you look at a squad that starred the likes of Ronald Koeman, Frank Rijkaard, Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten, but the Dutch had failed to even qualify for Euro 84 and both the 1982 and 1986 World Cups. England were the biggest underachievers, failing to win a single point and finishing bottom of their group, whereas West Germany, Italy and the Soviet Union all progressed to the semi-finals. Germany lost against the Netherlands in the semis, in a game that meant more to the Dutch than the final itself, owing to their wartime grievances and their notable defeats against their neighbours at major tournaments. Despite going out partying for the next 4 nights, they still managed to beat the USSR 2-0 in the final, with Marco van Basten scoring what is probably the greatest Euros goal of all time. 1992. France. Group stage. The biggest disappointment by an outright favourite, France have a penchant for both the spectacular and the spectacular meltdown, and at Euro 92, they went full Chernobyl. In truth, it was practically a 3-way tie in terms of the pre-tournament favourites heading into Euro 92, between France, Germany and the Netherlands. Germany were the reigning world champions, of course. Meanwhile, World Cup finalists Italy failed to even qualify, which is the opposite problem to the one that they keep having in recent years. Italy missed out in qualifying to the Soviet Union, but by the time that Euro 92 came around, the dissolution of the USSR meant that the Soviet Union competed under the banner of the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, during their worst ever Euros showing, finishing bottom of their group. Yugoslavia, meanwhile, had become the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, or FR Yugoslavia, and were banned outright from competing, despite having qualified, by virtue of sanctions imposed on them by UN Security Council Resolution 757 in the midst of the Yugoslav wars. After Yugoslavia, or the former Yugoslavia, were kicked out, Denmark, who had finished below them in qualifying, were offered a lifeline, but their star man Michael Laudrup refused the call and chose to continue his summer holiday. Without him, and as the most unfancy team going into the tournament, Denmark overcame both the Netherlands and Germany en route to being crowned as champions. It is an incredible story, and I have a whole video about it, should any of you be interested. France, by contrast, now managed, badly, it should be said, by Michel Platini, despite boasting a star-studded side, which featured the likes of Laurent Blanc, Emmanuel Petit, Didier Deschamps, Jean-Pierre Papin and Eric Cantona, failed to win a single game, and were dumped out in the group stage alongside England as Denmark and Sweden progressed. This was the last Euros to feature just 8 teams, the last Euros in which a team was only rewarded with 2 points for a win, and the last Euros before the introduction of the backpass rule, which was exploited masterfully in Sweden by the victorious Danes. 1996. Germany. Winners. Euro 96 was the first Euros, as most people under the age of about 40 now know it. It was expanded from 8 teams to 16, lasted over 3 weeks, and involved 4 groups, a quarterfinals, semi-finals, and final. In fact, to be plainly honest, it was the best Euros format before the expansion to 24 teams that happened in 2016, where most third-place teams now progress, rendering the group stage meaningless for a lot of teams, and reducing the level of entertainment on offer. But I've ranted about that enough in the past. The first Euros hosted by England, the Three Lions were the 4th favourites, behind Germany, Italy and the Netherlands, and there was little to split especially those 3. If there was an outright favourite, and many bookmakers had all 3 tied on the same odds, then it was probably Germany, who didn't have the best 1994 World Cup, knocked out by Bulgaria in the quarterfinals, but had bounced back, like Alan Partridge, with victories against Italy, Portugal and the Netherlands, were managed by former World Cup and Euros winner Bertie Vogts, and could boast the likes of Matthias Sammer, Jurgen Koller, and Jurgen Klinsmann, all at the peak of their powers. Of the favourites, it was Italy's turn to publicly soil themselves, dumped out in the group stage. Meanwhile, the Netherlands only saved their skin with a late goal in a 4-1 defeat against England, before falling to France in the quarter-finals. Germany and England met in the semis, in another game that went to penalties where, inevitably, Germany won. The Czech Republic were the surprise packages, making it all the way through to the final, where they only lost against Germany in extra time, with Oliver Bierhoff grabbing the golden goal. 2000. France and the Netherlands. Winners and semis. One of only 2 absolute ties in this video, there was nothing to split France and the Netherlands with most bookies in the build-up to Euro 2000, and therefore, there's nothing to split them in this video. France won the 1998 World Cup in style, beating Brazil 3-0 in the final, and could call upon the immense talents of Marcel Desailly, Lilian Thuram, Zinedine Zidane, Patrick Vieira, Thierry Henry and David Trezeguet. The Netherlands, meanwhile, made the semis of the 1998 World Cup and were blessed with just as talented a squad, starring Edwin van der Sar, Jaap Stam, Frank de Boer, Clarence Seedorf, Edgar Davids, Mark Overmars, Patrick Kluivert and Dennis Bergkamp. The two favourites were drawn in the same group, where the Netherlands beat France 3-2, by which stage both teams had already progressed. The Dutch may have won the battle, but it was France who won the war. Unlike in the Napoleonic Wars. Yeah, you weren't expecting a Napoleonic War reference in this video, were you? Always expect the unexpected on this channel. The Netherlands reached the semis, where they drew 0-0 with Italy but lost on penalties. Meanwhile, France won the final, against Italy, in the most dramatic circumstances imaginable. Substitute Sylvain Wiltord equalised in the 94th minute, taking the game to extra time, where another substitute, David Trezeguet, won the game for France in the 103rd minute. 2004. France. Quarter-finals. France couldn't make it 3 from 3 at the 2002 World Cup in terms of major tournaments. In fact, they were absolutely abysmal, plagued by injuries, suspensions and infighting, and exiting in last place in Group A without a single victory to their name. But the bookies were backing them to bounce back big in Portugal, and with good reason. Zidane, Desailly and Makelele were still around. Meanwhile, Vieira, Henry and Trezeguet were playing the best football of their careers. Nonetheless, there was little to split them and their Euro 2000 final opponents Italy, who were the two big favourites, not England, despite their failure to win this tournament, routinely being portrayed as some kind of aberration. Italy underwhelmed, going out in the group stage, even if they did have the same number of points as Sweden and Denmark. Meanwhile, France and England were both knocked out in the quarterfinals, at a Euros that was rife with upsets. England lost against the host Portugal on penalties, but France, the favourites, having topped England's group, lost 1-0 against Greece in the quarters. That became a familiar scoreline for Greece, who won every knockout game 1-0 en route to winning the Euros, possibly eclipsing even Denmark in 1992 for the crown of the most surprising Euros champions of all time. 2008. Germany. Finalists. Following the upsets and giant killings of Euro 2004, the two clear favourites, Germany and Spain, both made it through to the final of Euro 2008. That's not to say that there weren't any upsets. France finished bottom of their group, and both Turkey and Russia made the semis, but by the final, it was the last two that everyone expected. Germany, you may be surprised to discover, actually edged the possession stats by 52 to 48% before Vicente Del Bosque's appointment for the national team and Pep Guardiola's appointment and gargantuan influence upon Spanish football at Barcelona, but Spain had the lion's share of the chances, registering 13 shots to Germany's 4 and 7 on target to Germany's 1. In the end, it was a 33rd minute goal by Fernando Torres that won the game, and Spain won their first Euro since 1964, and only their second major tournament of any description. 2012. Spain. Winners. Narrow favourites heading into Euro 2008, practically neck and neck with Germany, Spain were clear favourites 4 years later in Poland and Ukraine. They had won the World Cup for the first time in the intervening period. Meanwhile, Pep Guardiola's revolution at Barcelona had swept the world of football by storm. 7 Barca players made the Spain squad, with Xavi, Piqué, Iniesta, Busquets, Fabregas and Pedro all playing something close to the best football of their careers, plus left-back Jordi Alba, who joined Barca shortly after the tournament. Spain didn't have everything their own way. They needed penalties to overcome their Iberian neighbours Portugal in the semis, illustrating how difficult it is to win a major tournament, even if you have by far the best team. In the final, however, they were extremely comfortable, beating Italy 3-0, and it could easily have been 6 or 7. 2016. France. Finalists. France were chosen ahead of Italy and Turkey as Euro 2016 hosts, and on home soil, Les Bleus were the pre-tournament favourites for the 4th time in the last 6 Euros. France only reached the quarter-finals of the 2014 World Cup albeit they were knocked out by eventual winners Germany, who were very nearly tied with them as favourites heading into Euro 2016. But not only did France have home advantage, they also had the burgeoning talents of Samuel Umtiti, Paul Pogba and Antoine Griezmann growing into their roles with the national team. The two favourites made it through to the semis, where they met in Marseille, with a Griezmann double booking France a spot in the final for a third time. There, they met Portugal, slight outsiders heading into the tournament, who hadn't actually won a single game in 90 minutes until the semi-finals. Portugal failed to win a single group game, finishing third in their group, below Hungary and Iceland, and they would have been eliminated were it not for the tournament's expansion and change of format at that Euros. They scored in the 117th minute to beat Croatia in the round of 16, required penalties to get the better of Poland in the quarter-finals, and were paired with Wales in the semis. France were big favourites heading into the final, therefore, and probably even bigger favourites when Cristiano Ronaldo was forced off through injury after just 25 minutes and replaced by Ricardo Quaresma. France had more of the ball and more of the chances, but failed to make it count. And after Portugal took yet another game to extra time, substitute Eder became the very unlikely hero in the 109th minute, winning Portugal their first ever major tournament and sinking the favourites at the final hurdle. 2020. England and France. Finalists and round of 16. The second of only two ties in this video, there was nothing to split France and England with most bookies heading into Euro 2020, typically tied at odds of 5-1. If anything, France may have just been very slight favourites. I found them at 9-2 in a few places, but there was also the odd source that had England as marginal favourites, so I couldn't really split them. In reality, if the English didn't gamble so much, France would have been the favourites. They won the 2018 World Cup, fairly emphatically, and the likes of N'Golo Kante, Karim Benzema and Kylian Mbappe came into the tournament banging form. England, by contrast, semi-finalists at the last World Cup, undoubtedly had a very talented squad, but also a very young and inexperienced one. Jude Bellingham was only 17, Bukayo Saka was 19, Jadon Sancho and Phil Foden were 21, and Declan Rice and Mason Mount were only 22. Nonetheless, it had the feel of a home tournament for England, despite the fact that it was actually hosted by 11 different countries, because if they won their group, their route to the final would only involve one game not at Wembley Stadium. Sure enough, that's exactly how it worked out, with England beating Germany, Ukraine and Denmark en route to a final showdown with Italy, who beat England on penalties following a 1-1 draw. France, meanwhile, stunned everyone, only winning one of their three group games and then getting knocked out by Switzerland on penalties following a 3-3 draw in the round of 16. 2024. England. Who the hell knows? Again, England has a gambling addiction. In fairness, if you'd have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said that if Jude Bellingham and Harry Kane are both fit, which it seems as though they are, England would deserve to be joint favourites with France heading into Euro 2024. I probably wouldn't have assumed, however, that Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw would be injured. I know, more fool me on the last one. John Stones would be potentially injured or at least not fully fit, and both Jack Grealish and Marcus Rashford would have been dropped following catastrophic drop-offs in form. England still ought to be one of the favourites heading into Euro 2024. Their attacking talent dictates as much, but I'm not convinced outright favourites is a reasonable set of expectations given the unfamiliarity of their back four and the continued lack of an obvious partner for Declan Rice in midfield. France and Germany, unsurprisingly, are the next favourites. Meanwhile, Georgia and Albania are the longest odds to pull off an upset, priced at up to 950-1. So, to summarise, the outright favourites, even including the two occasions in which there have been two of them, have won a total of 7 out of a possible 16 European Championships, or 43.75%. 4 tournaments, or 5 at a push, if you include Portugal in 2016, have been won by genuine outsiders. So somewhere between a quarter to a third of them could be described as real upsets, and only once, France in 1992, have the favourites failed to even get out of their groups. It should be said, however, that those stats are skewed fairly significantly based upon time frame and format. Until Euro 80, there were only 4 teams at a Euros finals, and not until Euro 96 did that increase to 16 teams with a proper group and knockout stage format. Until 1980, therefore, the favourites, along with the other 3 teams to qualify for the last 4, had automatically booked themselves a spot in the semi-finals. Look, what I'm trying to say here is that we've learnt absolutely nothing. The favourites tend to do quite well, because they're good teams with good players, otherwise they wouldn't be the favourites, but sometimes they just fall short, very occasionally they crash and burn, and every now and then an unfancied team goes all the way because, hey, it's football. Ultimately, we didn't learn nothing though, did we? Because we learnt a little bit about every Euros along the way, the rise and fall of national teams throughout that period, and how the format has changed over the years. What I am saying, I suppose, is that it's about the journey, not the destination. And what a journey it's been. Remember that bit about the Napoleonic Wars? Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed, not just to this channel, HITC Sevens, and have notifications turned on, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now. I plan to upload to both. I am in Germany for the whole Euros, in case you didn't know. Yeah, plan to have videos on both of them. So, you know, why not subscribe to both? Totally free of charge. What's the worst that could happen? If you really hate it, you can always unsubscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all 3, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.